believe we're going to start about now. Okay. All right, so good morning again. I'm going to turn towards the DocuCam so you're going to see me facing away. And so we're covering lesson 6.6 on the quadratic formula. And I can't stress this. This is mucho importante. As important as it gets, it's the culminating thing in this lesson. This is the last, in the unit. This is the last lesson in the unit. You must memorize the formula. And we'll tell you what that is when we get to it, okay? So you're going to be solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Just recognize that when we do factoring, and down here I'm going to have us do a little factoring and then solve by taking square roots. You can always get you cannot always get a solution when you solve by factoring. A lot of times you say, oh, wow, it doesn't factor. So it's easy. So this is easy. And in fact, solving by factoring is the easiest, right, way to actually come up with your answer. But if you can't do that, you can solve by taking the square root, which is also easy, not quite as easy as factoring. Okay, but they just don't work all the time. These do not work all the time. So I'm just going to put a little arrow here and here so you understand that, okay? All right, so you're going to take notes on this. You're going to get them into me by Saturday at 11:59 p.m. Make sure you do the header. All right, so let's look at the first problem here. This is just solving by factoring. So this is going down memory lane. And the first thing you want to do with these is you want to set y to equal 0. So that means I've got to subtract 9 here on both sides. And that just has the effect of moving the 9 over and leaving a 0 here on the far right of the equal sign. So we'll rewrite that as 4x squared minus 16 minus, and let's see, negative 16, negative 9 is negative 25, and that equals 0. And then, of course, you go ahead and you do the double bubble thing. And so what times what equals 4x squared? Well, 2x. So this is 2x times 2x. And then what times what equals negative 25? Well, 25 is 5 times 5, and then if it's negative, you want positive 25, negative 25. And that all equals 0. Okay? So break this up, as you know, into two equations. So you take the first bubble, 2x plus 5 equals 0. And the second bubble, 2x minus 5 equals 0. Oh, I wrote 25. 2x plus, this is me going too fast, guys. Sorry. 2x plus 5 and 2x minus 5. So 5 times 5, positive 5 times negative 5 is negative 25. Now I've got it right. Okay, so, again, if you aren't sure about this, and you want to go back to what it was before, then you can go ahead and multiply it back together and you'll come up with this trinomial. All right, so that equals 0. Now, to get x by itself on the left, you subtract 5 from both sides, and so you get 2x equals, this goes away, negative 5. And then you divide by 2, and you get x equals negative 5 halves. Okay? And then over here, you add 5 to both sides. And of course it goes away on the left, and you get 2x equals positive 5. And then divide by 2, and you get x equals positive 5 halves. So those are your two answers. And you could do plus or 2. X is plus, well, x equals plus or minus 5 halves, or x equals 5 halves, comma, negative 5 halves. Whichever, all of these are correct answers, but whichever works in IXL, that's the one you want to do, okay? All right, now, taking square roots. So you got to do the same thing here. You have to, well, in this case, you have to isolate whatever is squared, okay? So here, I would isolate whatever is squared, which is the 4x squared, because you want to get the x by itself. So you want to add 16 to both sides. So we add 16. And this negative x squared goes away on the left, and you end up with 4x squared equals 9 and 16 is positive 25. Okay? Now, you divide by 4 to get x squared all by itself. And that means you've got x squared equals 25 divided by 4. Well, that's a perfectly good fraction, so let's leave it that way for the moment, and let's take the square root of the fraction. So I'm going to take the square root of x squared, and you know that anything that is squared that you take the radical of is going to be the root, which is x. And then over here we're going to have plus or minus the square root of 25. So we're left with x equals, now what is the, let's put the plus or minus down. What is the root of 25? 5 times 5 is 25, so that would leave us with 5 in the numerator, and the denominator, 4 is 2 times 2, so 5 halves. So the answer is plus or minus 5 halves. And again, you could use this, or you could use x equals negative 5 halves, and x equals positive 5 halves, or you could do x equals negative 5 halves, comma, positive 5 halves. Okay? Same answers, same results. Okay? All right, let's move on. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula and completing the square, I'm just going to write this up here. Quadratic formula and completing the square always get you a solution for x. When y equals 0. So you remember when we were completing the square, we were getting answers that had an imaginary number in them. So completing the square had no issues with that. You would sometimes get real numbers as well. But the quadratic formula, actually, a lot of people like it. I like it. But the thing is, again, you've got to memorize this baby. If you don't memorize it, you're going to be lost. And it's the single most important thing that you do here. And, okay, I've memorized it through the years. I memorized it, though, in high school. I learned to memorize it. Back in my day, memorization was very important. People did it all the time, so we were used to it. But in this case, what it is, it's just the quadratic formula. I'm sorry, it's just the quadratic equation here. and actually it's the quadratic equation in the form that you would use for completing the square, solved for x. Okay? That's what it is. That's what you see here. Now, what is it? X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Whoa, there it is. Now, notice I said opposite. It's just easier to think of it that way because you sometimes have a negative number for b, sometimes you have a positive number for b. Where do I get the b from? It's right up here. So when you have your quadratic equation set to equal 0, then this is your a, this is your b, this is your c, and that's what you're putting in here. Here's your a, here's your b, here's your c. They all match up, okay? All right, so make sure you understand that. This is where you're getting it, getting the a, b, and c from. So, you know, the a is going to go over here, and it's also going to come down here. The b is going to go down here and over here. The c is going to go over here, if you're a visual person. Now, a lot of teachers through the years, particularly after we got away from some of the memorization, set this to music. So pop goes the weasel. And I'm not very good at this because I'm even though I do like music, and you know, I get into the technicalities of it. Let me see if I can do it. So opposite of b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. That's it. So, you know, get yourself into a jingle if that helps you to remember it. That wasn't very good singing on my part, but that's the idea. Okay, try to find a way to remember this. And so when you memorize, you're using something called a mnemonic. A mnemonic. That just means a method to memorize something. Something you want to remember. I think I got the E in there and don't need it. But anyway, it's just memorization. So find some kind of mnemonic like pop goes the weasel. Go ahead and memorize this. But get it done. Do it now. Okay? All right. So let's move on. All right. So we're going to finally look at our examples here. And I've got 2 problems here and 2 problems there. So we're going to use the quadratic formula to solve the questions. We're going to write as integers, reduced fractions, or decimals rounded to the nearest hundredth. So remember that you're doing that, okay? All right, so all right, let's find our a, b, and c here. So you'll see you've got negative x squared in the first problem, the a problem, so recognize that's a 1. So that's your a, negative 1. Your b is 2. Your c is 4. Knowing that, set up your formula. X equals opposite of b squared plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times ac, all divided by 2a. Okay, so try to keep that as neat as I can. When you do these, it's best to put all the letters in parentheses. So parentheses, 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 parentheses. Don't do it in your formula itself. Do it when you actually take the numbers and put them in. So let me explain that as we go. So let's fill this in. So x equals, and then I want the opposite, and I forgot the opposite. Opposite goes over here. So I want the opposite of, what's the b? 2. So the opposite of 2, that'll become negative 2, obviously. All right? Plus or minus the square root of, and I'll put the b in here, and it's going to be squared, and b again is 2. And it's minus 4 times a times c. Stand this out. And a is, what do we say a was? A was negative 1. And c is 4. And that's all divided by 2a. 2 times a. Now, the reason I say use parentheses, don't use little x's or something for multiplication, is you will get confused and you will get this wrong. But if you fill it in this way, you will always get it right. Now, the first thing we're going to work on here is what's under the radical, because the radical is like parentheses. It's the same, in the same category as parentheses and PEMDAS. You're using PEMDAS to simplify all these. You are not solving for x, because x technically is already solved. X equals this stuff here. We just have to simplify. So PEMDAS. So this stuff under the radical sign is called the discriminant. Let me spell that right. Discriminant. Okay. And what I want you to do is use your calculator for this. So get my graphing calculator over here. And turn the silly thing on and clear it. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type what I see here. So I'm going to type parentheses 2 and parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses negative 1 and parentheses, new parentheses 4 parentheses. And then hit enter, and I get 20. Okay, so that's the toughest part of this whole thing. So I just rewrite this as x equals, this is negative 2, plus or minus the square root of 20. And, oh, and my a here was, I wrote a instead of my number. My a is negative 1, so this is negative 1. 2 times negative 1. So 2 times negative 1 in the denominator is negative 2. Okay? So now it's simplifying very nicely. So I'm just going to set this up into 2 solutions for x. X is negative 2 plus the square root of 20 divided by negative 2. And x is negative 2 minus the square root of 20 divided by negative 2. All right. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and use the calculator again to solve this, because you are going to be in a world of hurt if you have to do this all by hand, because you make mistakes, positives and negatives, and writing things down incorrectly. Go slow, go through this, make sure, color code, just like I'm doing here with the A, B, and C. Get yourself started. Do all this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply together the numerator here. So I'm going to take negative, whoop, it wants to do answer, I don't want that. Negative 2 plus the square root of 20. So I go over here to second and square root 20, close the parentheses, and you'll see I get 2.47. Now I'm going to divide all of that. Is it 2.47? I think it is. I'm going to divide all of that by negative 2. And I get negative 1.236. So that's negative 1.24. So x is approximately, now approximately, what do we say? Negative 1.24. All right, now let's do the other one. So I'm going to first do the numerator. So let's clear this. So I want negative 2, this time minus the square root of 20, close the parentheses, and you get, I see you get negative 6.47 roughly. divided by -2. So take the answer, divide by -2, and you get 3.236. I'm going to show it as x equals 3 point, is approximately, I should say, 3.24. Okay, so notice I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, because that's what it tells me to do. So that means that, you know, the second term over, if the third term beyond it is 5 or greater, then I round up, which is what I did here. And so these are your two exact answers. So these are perfectly good exact answers. These are the estimated answers. And depending upon what you're being told by IXL, that's what you're going to do. All right, let's do the next one. All right, so here my A is 5, my B is 3, and my C is -1. So I'm going to write, here we go again, x equals the opposite of b squared plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Okay, so let's plug it all in. So x equals negative, and then in parentheses, or b is 3. And remember, negative just means the opposite of. Plus or minus the square root of, in parentheses, 3 squared minus 4 times a times c. A is 5. C is -1. All divided by 2 times whatever a is, and a is 5. Okay, do the discriminant again. Do the discriminant. Use the calculator. So, let's clear this. So I want parentheses. Let me get this up so you can see it. Parentheses 3, and then I'm going to square that, minus 4, parentheses, my a is 5, and parentheses, and c is -1, and parentheses, hit enter, and I get 29. So I'm going to write x equals the opposite of 3, which is -3, plus or minus the square root of 29, all divided by 2 times 5 is 10. Okay? All right, so now all I do is, let's split this up. So x equals -3 plus the square root of 29 divided by 10, and x equals -3 minus the square root of 29 divided by 10. All right, so frankly, these are good answers. Remember, the square root of 29, that's, you know, square root of 2 times the square root of 13. That's all you can factor it into. And so you can't really do anything with this. So these are acceptable answers again. But we want the approximate answers as well, because they may be asking for them. So x is approximately, let's take our calculator. And so let's do let's do parentheses -3 plus the square root, oops, did that wrong. Let's try it again. Parentheses -3 in parentheses plus second square root of 29. Close that parentheses, and we get 2.39, okay, when we round it up. And 2.39, so let's just do that. 2.39, if we divide it by 10, that's going to be just move a decimal point over, 0.239. And that's approximate. So approximately 0.239. Right? And then over here, this is x is approximately. So let's go and do parentheses -3, parentheses minus this time, the square root of 29. Close the parentheses, hit enter, and we get negative 8.385, which is negative 8.39 when we round it. And again, divide that by 10. X is approximately negative 0.839. Okay, because we're just moving the decimal point over 1. You can divide it by 10 in your calculator if you want. That makes it simpler, but this is just as easy. So here's again the possibilities. This is approximate, and that's why the wavy lines. That's what they mean. Instead of equaling exactly, this is the exact answer. So you can get an exact answer, you can get an approximate answer when you're dealing with these radicals. Okay, we only have 2 left. So in this case, let's see, x squared plus 4x equals negative 4. We need to get that negative 4 over with the rest of the equation, okay? Because we got to set x to equal 0. Or well, just let's say set equal to 0. Set the value of what is over here on the left to equal 0. So set to equal 0. Right? So I got to move the negative 4. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. And when I do that, I get x squared plus 4x plus 4. This cancels, so that equals 0. Now, set up my formula. So, again, x equals opposite of b, opposite of b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Okay, so a, b, and c. So this is 1x squared, so our a is 1, our b is 4, and our c is 4. Okay. All right, so x equals negative, and then in parentheses we're going to put a 4 plus or minus square root of parentheses squared 4 again, minus 4 times whatever a and c are, and a is 1, c is 4. Okay, all divided by 2 times whatever a is, which is 1. Okay. All right, so this becomes x equals negative 4 plus or minus, well, let's find out what's in the discriminant here. So let's clear this, parentheses, let's make sure we can see all this, parentheses 4 and parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses 1 and parentheses 4 and parentheses. Hit enter. Whoa, what do we got? We got 0. So this is plus or minus 0 because the square root of 0 is 0, right? Divided by 2 times 1 is 2. So what does that simplify to? Well, that simplifies to negative 4 over 2. Plus or minus 0 is just 0. So you just get one solution here. Your solution is negative 2. So sometimes you get one solution, as we know. for what x is when y equals 0. Okay? All right. So that takes you through all but the last one. So the last problem, we have, well, now we've got the x squared all by itself, but we need to get the 2x and the negative 3 there and set it to equal 0. So what do we got to do? We got to subtract 2x, and we got to add 3. We got to do the opposite, but we got to do it to both sides. So subtract 2x and add 3. Okay? So over here, we end up with x squared minus 2x plus 3, and then this goes away, so this is 0. Okay? All right. Now we find our a, b, and c, so we've got 1x squared here. That's our a. Our b is negative 2, and our c is 3. So now that we know that, we set up our formula again. X equals negative b. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that silly rhyme right now because we've done it many times and you now know what it is. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Okay. So let's fill it all in. X equals negative parentheses, and our b is negative 2. Now this is where it becomes really important to have parentheses. Negative times negative is positive. Opposite of, this is basically the opposite of negative 2. So that's positive 2. Plus or minus the square root of, and it's negative 2 squared minus 4 times a times c. A is 1, c is 3, all divided by 2 times a, and a is 1 again. All right, so simplifying, x is the opposite of negative 2, that's positive 2, plus or minus, now the discriminant. All right, so again, when you're doing a calculator, here's where people tend to get these things wrong. Unless you put the negative 2 in a parentheses in your calculator, you're going to end up with, instead of getting negative 2 times negative 2, which is positive 4, you'll end up with a negative 4 because it's basically going to be negative 2 times positive 2. At least that's what the calculator thinks. So always do the discriminant with the parentheses in the calculator. So, and frankly, just make it a practice of doing that every time and you'll never be wrong. So parentheses, negative 2 in parentheses squared. There, it's done right. Minus 4 times a is 1, times c is 3, and we get negative 8. Okay, so negative 8, so that's square root of negative 8. Square root of negative 8, all divided by 2. Now here's the problem. Negative 8 is a, no. And it's really, negative 8 is really, square root of negative 8, that is really square root of negative 1 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. And that's really, the square root of negative 1, as we know, is I. And square root of 4 is 2. And the square root of 2 is, well, square root of 2 is just square root of 2. So that cleans up into, what did I say here? 2i squared. 2i, you just reverse the 2 and the I squared. All right, so you end up with x equals 2 plus or minus 2i squared, all divided by 2. Now, what I would recommend doing is that we break up these two expressions here, the 2 and the plus and the minus, but we also break them up so that we have a denominator under each one. So let's do it this way. So x equals 2 over 2 plus 2I squared divided by 2. And x equals 2 over 2 minus 2I squared over 2. Now you can easily see that 2 divided by 2 is going to be 1. 2 divided by 2 over here is going to be 1. And this 2 divided by 2 is going to be 1. And this 2 divided by 2 is going to be 1. So you can rewrite this as 1 plus I squared and 1 minus I squared. I'm sorry, not I squared. 1, let me restate that. This is where I get my mind ahead of what I'm doing. So this is I. What did I do here? Okay, 2I square root of 2, not 2I squared. 2I square root of 2. So change this up above. This is what needs to come over. Okay, so I said 2I squared when I meant 2I square root of 2. 2I square root of 2. 2I square root of 2. Please make that change. All right. Now, like I said, the 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that leaves you with I square root of 2. Now, could we divide them into the square root of 2? No, because this is a radical and this is a real number. So you cannot do that. So same thing over here. Let's get rid of this. So this is 1 minus I square root of 2. And there are your two perfectly acceptable, exact, but a very imaginary answers, which, as you know, you will not be able to find on the x-axis because it's either above the x-axis, the parabola is either above the x-axis or it's below the x-axis, but it's not on it. So you won't find a solution for x where y equals 0 when you've got imaginary numbers. You will when you have real numbers. This happens to have 1. 1 point. So the parabola is either sitting on top of the x-axis or it's sitting or hanging down from like a bat from the x-axis. Okay, so that's basically it. We got it done, and so the rest of the period is for you to clean up your notes. If you need me to show you one of these pages again because you weren't, you need to take a picture of it or something, that's fine. I am going to be uploading this. It'll take me a little while, but I should have it done by the end of the period. So look for it, and then you can go back and double check your notes and then go on to the IXL skill, which is K11. K11. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. I'm going to let you start on that. I'm going to stop the recording now.